Thy Purrfect Steed, by Stephen Lake. A knight of the noblest order of Catan stepped quietly out of the castle he was stationed in and into the stables that sat at the foot of the inner tower of the fortress to retrieve his faithful steed for yet another day of boring yet important patrols around the region. However, upon arriving, he was shocked to discover that there were no horses there anymore, including his own. Instead, he looked on in abject confusion to see a squire putting his saddle on a gigantic tabby cat, not a lion or a bear or even a horse, just an ordinary house cat of giant proportions. He cocked his head in disbelief at this. "Pray tell, dear lad, where's my noble steed?" he asked curiously. The squire, who was busy cinching in place the final parts of the saddle in front of him, looked over briefly at the knight before returning to his work. "Ah, Sir Notsaluk, good morning," he replied happily. "Good morning to you. However, where's my horse?" The squire briefly stroked the side of the now saddled cat and smiled. "He is no longer here, sir, because, due to imperial budget cuts, we had to sell him, as well as all of the other horses, and replace them with creatures from the pool of available summons that we had on staff," he replied proudly. The knight looked at the squire in perplexity. "So are you saying that, instead of me riding my regular steed today, I must ride this Were-Tiger in a battle?" he asked. The squire smiled and nodded. "Yes, sir." The knight stood there quietly for several moments longer before eventually grunting. "Umph, we shall see about that," he replied. He then stormed away to speak with the captain of the guard about this. However, it wasn't long before he returned with a look of abject dejection on his face. As he re-entered the stables, the squire looked at him curiously. "So what did the captain of the guard say?" he asked. The knight frowned at this. "That I am to keep my silence if I desire to retain my employment," he replied in frustration. The squire grinned slightly at this. "Then should I get your mount ready for you?" he asked. The knight sighed in disappointment. "Yes, if you would, please," he replied with a hint of defeat in his voice. The squire smiled at this, and then said, "Right away, sir." He then hurried into the stables, brought out one of the other Were-Tigers, saddled it, and then brought it to the front of the stables where the Were-Tiger sat down and studied the knight briefly before licking itself. The knight, in turn, narrowed his eyes at this. "I may as well get this over with," he muttered quietly. He then walked to the side of the Were-Tiger, put his foot in the stirrup, and then climbed aboard. However, as he settled into his saddle, he found himself sitting unfortunately in a reclining position. Not wanting to remain there, he clicked twice with his mouth, which caused the Were-Tiger to stand up, partially jostling him as it did. "Steady, steady," he said in reply to this. However, the Were-Tiger was having none of this and violently tossed him in his saddle as he shook out his entire body. Thankfully, even though he was a bit shaken by this, it had resulted in no harm to himself. He then clicked twice again as he gently poked the Were-Tiger with his spurs. While the Were-Tiger didn't quite like this, it obeyed him anyways and began to move forward. The two of them then slowly made their way out of the castle and onto the road beyond to begin their patrol. However, it was not long after this that a gigantic Ratatan burst out of the forest that lined the edge of the road and stopped in the middle. The monstrous rat creature then turned and glared at the Were-Tiger, who hissed angrily at it in return. The Were-Tiger then bent down, throwing the knight awkwardly forward in his saddle as he clung desperately to it, so as not to fall off. "Steady now, lad, steady," protested the knight. However, the way the Were-Tiger was standing, as well as the way it playfully wiggled its butt, immediately told the knight that steady was the exact opposite of what the Were-Tiger was about to do. Upon realizing this, he frowned incredulously. Oh, bloody H! Suddenly the Were-Tiger exploded forward, and the race was on. Ratatan and Were-Tiger locked in mortal chase at the fastest possible speed that either one of them could achieve. The knight, much to his chagrin, was not in control of this unfortunate situation, as he was now little more than a passenger along for the ride. After nearly a minute of fruitlessly, or perhaps playfully chasing the Ratatan, the Were-Tiger slowed to a trot, and then eventually stopped, either being bored with its efforts to catch the giant rat monster, or perhaps too tired to care anymore. It then quietly licked at its paw, shook out its coat, and then sat there silently studying the road ahead. The poor knight, having miraculously survived this joyride of horrors, corrected himself in his saddle. After regaining his wits, he then set about scolding his fluffy tiger mount. "Stand fast, ye foul beast, before I fall off," he protested angrily. The tiger he was riding, however, completely ignored this command as it continued to groom itself once more. It then proceeded to reach up with its hind leg and scratch itself behind the ear, causing the knight to be kicked rather ignobly several times in the process. Eventually the tiger stood up again, much to the relief of the knight. "Forsooth, I shall need to increase my health insurance upon my return to the castle, if such an existence is to be foisted upon me furthermore," he muttered to himself. The knight then spurred the tiger forward, which it did obey, albeit reluctantly. However, after riding only a short distance more, the tiger stopped in its tracks as a rabbit appeared in the roadway ahead. It then, just as before, it crouched down as it began twitching its ears, wagging its butt playfully, and preparing itself to chase this new arrival with all its feline energy. The knight, realizing what was about to befall him, groaned quietly within himself. "Oh, bloody hell! Not again," he muttered. A moment later, the tiger bolted forward, his rider in tow, flapping around like a flag in the wind, and gave chase. The rabbit, in turn, bolted down the road at top speed in an effort to escape from the pursuing tiger as best it could. The two then went into a cross-country, four-legged recreation of a Top Gun dogfight through fields and dales as though their lives depended on it. And for the rabbit, it kinda did. "Heel thee, knave! Heel, before thou tear me asunder from thy running," protested the knight. However, just as expected, the tiger completely ignored him. So, the knight did the only thing he could do, and held on to his saddle for dear life. Eventually, though, the chase came to an end with the tiger running out of any further energy. It had to continue the chase, and subsequently stopped. However, rather than remaining upright, it instead flopped over on its side to catch its breath, resulting in its body pinning the knight to the ground in the process. The knight then kicked frantically at the tiger with his spurs, but was unsuccessful in getting it to move. "Get off me, you overweight buffoon," he protested angrily. However, the tiger completely ignored him, much to his chagrin. Then, as if to add insult to injury, the tiger briefly licked its paw, settled its head down, and then fell asleep. The knight looked at this in complete disbelief. "Are you bloody kidding me?" he said with deep incredulity. He again spurred the tiger several more times, but to no avail. Resigned to be trapped there on the ground until the tiger awoke from its nap, the knight quietly accepted his fate. However, as he lay there waiting for his mount to arise from its nap, another knight soon came trotting by on the back of a large, gray and white dire wolf of horse-sized proportions. The other knight, upon seeing Sir Notsaluk's predicament, raised his visor and grinned impishly. "I sense that you are in a bit of spot there, lad," he teased lightly. Sir Notsaluk, upon hearing this, turned and spotted his friend riding the dire wolf. "Ah, I see you're the poor victim of budget cuts as well, eh?" he replied. The second knight grunted at this. "That would be putting it ever so lightly," he muttered. Just then another knight, who had been forced to do his patrols on a magic carpet, soon came floating by them on his way to his assigned sector of patrol. However, as he did, the dire wolf took notice of him and immediately became excited, his tongue lolling out of his mouth as he, unfortunately, mistook the flying carpet for a frisbee. Thinking that it was playtime, the dire wolf immediately bolted away in pursuit of it as his knightly mount screamed in terror as he did his level best to remain in his saddle. As the two other knights raced off into the distance in a gigantic dog park game, Sir Notsaluk, still pinned under his sleeping tiger, shook his head in disbelief at this. "The Emperor needs to make good on the economy before my present dilemma becomes the death of me," he muttered to himself. However, it was right at this moment, as he was pondering this, that the dire wolf and his knightly rider came charging back towards them in pursuit of the now runaway flying carpet that it was still chasing. This ruckus, in turn, startled the tiger awake, causing it to leap onto its feet, bristle its fur, and hiss loudly. Upon realizing what was about to happen, Sir Notsaluk groaned deeply within himself as he slowly consigned himself to his soon-coming fate. "Oh, not again," he groaned. Moments later, the tiger turned and ran away from the dire wolf as fast as its legs could carry it and its unfortunate rider across the land. "For the love of the 9 ancient realms, will someone please stop this madness?" shouted Sir Notsaluk as he and his tiger mount raced off into the distance. However, unfortunately for him, due to deep, necessary kingdom-wide budget cuts, that would not be possible anytime soon.